Have you ever felt like you are giving your heart to someone, but somehow you are the only one truly holding the relationship together? You try to understand them, you try to be patient, you try to give them space, and still, something inside you keeps whispering that something is not right. Some days they feel close, almost loving, almost present. Then suddenly, they disappear again. No explanation, no clarity, just distance. And you sit there wondering what you did wrong. Maybe you spoke too much, maybe you asked for too much, maybe you expected too much, so you try to adjust yourself. You become calmer, more understanding, more careful with your words, because you do not want to lose them. But here is the painful truth many people do not realize until much later. Sometimes the person you are trying so hard to love is not building a relationship with you. They are only benefiting from your presence. This is one of the hardest emotional realities to accept. Because when we care about someone, our mind naturally protects them. We create explanations for their behavior. They are just stressed. They had a bad day. They are afraid of getting hurt. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes the deeper truth is different. Sometimes the person you are dealing with has an avoidant attachment style, and psychology tells us something very important about avoidant personalities. They often crave connection, but they also fear emotional closeness at the same time, so they stay near people who give them comfort, while keeping just enough distance to protect themselves from real vulnerability. And this creates a very confusing emotional experience for the person who loves them, because you are constantly trying to understand mixed signals. One moment they open the door to connection. The next moment they close it again. You move closer. They step back. You try harder. They become colder. And slowly, without even realizing it, something dangerous begins to happen inside your mind. You start blaming yourself for their distance. You start analyzing every message you send, every word you say, every emotion you express. You begin to believe that if you could just be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more perfect, maybe they would finally stay. But human psychology teaches us something powerful. When someone truly values your presence, you do not have to convince them to stay emotionally connected. Connection becomes natural. Effort becomes mutual. Care flows both ways. But when someone is emotionally avoidant and also benefiting from your effort, a different pattern appears. They accept everything you give, your patience, your emotional support, your attention, your time. But they do not invest in the same way. And because they are not openly cruel, the situation becomes even more confusing. They are not always cold, sometimes they are warm, sometimes they are kind, sometimes they even make you feel special, and those moments keep you hopeful. Those small moments convince you that something real is growing, so you hold on, you keep giving, you keep believing, but deep down, your intuition keeps sending signals. Something feels unbalanced, something feels one-sided, and that quiet feeling inside you deserves attention, because many people spend years ignoring that feeling. They stay in situations where their love is constantly being drained. They continue giving emotional energy to someone who is not truly building a future with them, not because they are weak, but because hope is powerful. Hope can keep people attached to emotional possibilities that may never become reality. And avoidant personalities often unintentionally feed that hope. They stay just close enough, just warm enough, just present enough to keep the connection alive, but never stable enough to make it secure. And if you are someone who values loyalty, patience, and emotional depth, this dynamic can slowly exhaust your heart. You start feeling confused. You start feeling anxious. You start wondering why love feels so difficult. But love is not supposed to feel like a constant emotional puzzle. Healthy connection brings clarity. Healthy connection brings emotional safety. Healthy connection does not make you question your worth every week. And that is why recognizing these patterns is so important. Because the goal is not to judge avoidant people. Many of them develop these patterns as a way to protect themselves emotionally. But protecting your own emotional well-being is also necessary. Understanding the signs can save you from giving years of your life to a connection that never truly grows. It can protect your energy, your peace, and most importantly, your self-respect. In this video, you are going to discover 4 powerful signs that an avoidant person may not be building a real relationship with you. These signs are not always obvious. In fact, many of them hide behind behaviors that seem normal at first. But once you see them clearly, something inside you will begin to change. Confusion will start turning into clarity. Self-doubt will begin turning into awareness, and that awareness can completely transform the way you approach relationships in the future. So stay with this until the end, because the final sign is the one that most people ignore the longest. The first sign often appears so quietly that most people do not notice it at the beginning. It looks small, almost harmless, but over time, it reveals a deep imbalance. You slowly realize that you are the one carrying the emotional weight of the connection. You are the one reaching out first. You start the conversations. You check on them. You keep the connection alive. At first, it feels normal. Someone has to make the first move sometimes, but days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and the pattern stays the same. If you do not send the message, silence appears. If you do not call, the phone stays quiet. If you do not suggest meeting, nothing happens, and your mind starts searching for explanations again. Maybe they are overwhelmed with work. Maybe they are dealing with personal problems. Maybe they just need time to open up. So you become even more patient. You give them more understanding. You tell yourself that real connection requires effort. But something important is hiding behind this pattern. When someone genuinely values your presence, their effort appears naturally. They do not feel forced to stay connected. They want to. Communication becomes something they look forward to. They want to know how your day went. They want to share their thoughts with you. They want to include you in their life. That desire creates balance. Energy flows in both directions. But when an avoidant person is using your presence for comfort rather than building something real, the balance disappears. They accept the attention you give. They enjoy the emotional support you offer. They appreciate the patience you show. Yet they rarely step forward with the same energy. Instead, they wait. They wait for you to initiate. They wait for you to keep the bond alive. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin doing the work of two people. You carry the emotional responsibility, you maintain the communication, you hold the connection together, and because you care deeply, you do not even notice how exhausting this becomes. Your brain adapts to the imbalance. It convinces you that if you just stay consistent, things will eventually improve. But emotional patterns rarely change without awareness, and that is where the second sign begins to reveal itself. This one is even more confusing. Because sometimes the avoidant person suddenly becomes warm again. Out of nowhere, they return with attention. They text you late at night. They want to talk. They act close again. In those moments, it feels like everything you hoped for is finally happening. You feel relief. You feel excitement. You feel that maybe the connection is finally growing. But there is a hidden pattern behind these sudden moments of closeness. Look carefully at when they appear. Often it happens when they feel lonely, when something stressful happens in their life, when their emotional world becomes unstable. In those moments, they seek comfort, and they know exactly where to find it. They come back to the person who has always been patient with them, the person who listens, the person who understands, the person who never judged them. That person is you. For a short time, they allow the emotional distance to disappear. They open up more, they communicate more, they show warmth again. And during those moments, it is easy to believe that something has changed. But once their emotional storm passes, something familiar happens again. The warmth fades. The conversations slow down. The distance quietly returns. And suddenly, you are back in the same confusing place where you started, wondering what happened, wondering why things shifted again. Psychology describes this as a push and pull dynamic. The avoidant individual moves closer when they need emotional stability. But once they begin feeling safe again, their fear of deep attachment returns. So they step away, not always intentionally, not always with bad intentions. But the result still creates emotional confusion for the other person involved, because the closeness feels real when it happens. It feels genuine. It feels meaningful. And those moments make it difficult to accept the overall pattern. Hope becomes stronger than clarity. You remember the nights they opened up. You remember the conversations that felt deep. You remember the brief moments where it seemed like they truly cared. And those memories keep you emotionally invested. But when you step back and observe the pattern honestly, something becomes clear. Their attention appears mostly when they need comfort. Their presence appears mostly when they feel unstable. And when life becomes calm again, the distance returns. This is not the rhythm of a growing relationship. It is the rhythm of emotional convenience. The connection becomes a place they visit when they feel empty, not a space they actively build with you. And over time, this cycle can quietly drain your emotional strength, because every return fills you with hope again, and every withdrawal leaves you feeling confused again. You begin questioning yourself. You begin wondering if you misunderstood something. You begin asking whether you should have done something differently. But the real issue is not your effort. It is the pattern itself. When someone only appears during moments of personal need, the connection slowly becomes one-sided. One person gives stability. The other receives it. One person invests consistently. The other participates only when it benefits them. And if this pattern continues long enough, it can slowly weaken your sense of emotional balance, because you start living inside someone else's emotional timing, waiting for the moments when they decide to return. After living inside that exhausting cycle for long enough, another change begins to happen inside you. At first, it is very subtle. It does not feel dramatic. It feels like a small adjustment you make just to keep the peace. You start holding back the things you once expressed openly. You become more careful, more quiet, more controlled with your emotions. And slowly, without even noticing the moment it started, you begin shrinking your own needs. You stop asking certain questions. You stop mentioning things that once mattered to you. You stop expressing when something hurts, not because those feelings disappeared, but because you learned that sharing them often creates distance. Every time you tried to talk about something important, the atmosphere changed. The energy became tense. The conversation suddenly felt heavy. Instead of understanding, you often received reactions that made you feel uncomfortable for speaking up. Sometimes you were told that you were thinking too much. Other times you were told you were too sensitive. Occasionally the response was silence, which can feel even more painful than criticism. The discussion simply closed down. The connection cooled again, and you were left feeling as if expressing yourself had caused a problem. This is where the third sign begins to appear. Your emotional needs slowly start being treated like burdens instead of something natural. You might ask for more communication. They respond as if you are demanding too much. You might want more clarity about where things are going. They act like the question creates unnecessary pressure. You might want more time together. They behave as if your desire for closeness is unreasonable. Over time, these reactions begin shaping the way you see yourself. You start questioning whether your expectations are fair. You start wondering whether you are too intense. Your mind begins rewriting the story. Instead of asking whether the connection is balanced, you begin analyzing whether you are the difficult one. This psychological shift is powerful, because once a person begins doubting their own needs, they start lowering their standards without realizing it. You become more quiet about what matters to you. You stop asking for reassurance. You stop bringing up emotional concerns. You try to become the easy person to be around, the person who never creates tension, the person who never asks for too much. But something important is happening beneath the surface. Your authentic voice is slowly disappearing. Instead of being your full self inside the connection, you begin performing a smaller version of yourself, a version designed to keep the peace, a version designed not to trigger emotional withdrawal. Human psychology explains why this happens so easily. People naturally adjust their behavior to avoid rejection. The brain sees distance as a threat to connection, so it tries to fix the problem by adapting. It searches for ways to maintain harmony. But when adaptation turns into self-silencing, the relationship begins to damage your inner stability. You start walking on emotional eggshells. Every message is carefully written. Every conversation is carefully controlled. Every topic is filtered through the question, will this push them away? And this creates a quiet form of emotional exhaustion. Because healthy connection should never require you to hide your real feelings just to keep someone present. Wanting communication is not excessive. Wanting honesty is not dramatic. Wanting emotional consistency is not unrealistic. These are basic elements of meaningful connection. When two people genuinely value each other, they make space for those needs. They listen even when the conversation feels uncomfortable. They try to understand even when the topic feels difficult. But someone who avoids emotional responsibility often responds differently. Instead of engaging with the issue, they shift the focus onto the person bringing it up. The conversation moves away from the original concern, and toward questioning your reaction. Now, the discussion is no longer about the problem. It becomes about whether your feelings are valid. And once this pattern repeats enough times, you begin internalizing the message. Maybe you really are asking for too much. Maybe you should relax more. Maybe relationships are not supposed to feel secure. These thoughts slowly reshape the way you see yourself. Your confidence in your emotional instincts begins to fade. You hesitate before trusting your own feelings. And when someone stops trusting their inner voice, they become easier to keep inside confusing situations. Because without that inner compass, it becomes harder to recognize when something is not healthy. You remain inside uncertainty longer than you should. You continue offering patience while your own emotional needs remain unfulfilled. And the person creating this imbalance may not even realize the depth of what is happening. From their perspective, they might simply feel uncomfortable with emotional intensity. They might genuinely believe they are protecting themselves from pressure, but the impact on the other person can still be deeply damaging. Because every time your needs are dismissed, minimized, or treated as inconvenient, a small piece of your self-trust erodes. And when that erosion continues long enough, something dangerous begins forming. You stop asking whether the connection is right for you. Instead, you start focusing only on how to make the connection survive. Your attention shifts away from your own well-being. Your energy becomes centered around maintaining closeness with someone who remains emotionally distant. And this is where many people lose years of their emotional life. They keep adjusting. They keep hoping. They keep believing that if they just become easier to love, things will eventually stabilize. But a connection cannot grow when only one person is allowed to have emotional needs. Real intimacy requires two people who are willing to show up fully. Two people who allow honesty without punishment. Two people who understand that vulnerability is not weakness. Without that shared responsibility, the connection slowly becomes something else. It becomes a place where one person gives emotional understanding while the other avoids emotional depth. And the longer that pattern continues, the more invisible the imbalance becomes. Until one day you realize something that feels deeply unsettling. You have been trying to protect the connection. And when that realization finally begins to settle in your mind, another painful truth slowly becomes visible. The connection has never completely disappeared. The person never fully walked away, yet something has always remained unfinished, undefined, suspended in uncertainty. You were never clearly chosen. At the same time, you were never completely released either. This strange middle space can keep someone emotionally trapped for a very long time, because when a relationship clearly ends, the pain is direct. It hurts deeply, but closure eventually arrives. Healing slowly begins. Life starts moving again. But when the bond never reaches a clear ending or a clear commitment, the mind remains in a constant state of waiting. You keep wondering what this connection really means. You keep asking yourself where things are going. You keep hoping that one day everything will finally become stable and certain. And this is where the fourth sign quietly reveals itself. They keep you close enough to remain part of their emotional world, yet never step forward with full commitment. The relationship exists in fragments. Some days feel meaningful, some moments feel intimate, some conversations feel important, but the bigger picture never becomes solid. There is always uncertainty about the future. Plans remain vague, promises remain unclear, serious conversations somehow change direction or disappear before reaching a real answer. And every time clarity almost arrives, something shifts again. The subject changes, the timing suddenly feels wrong, or the emotional distance returns. From a psychological point of view, this pattern often appears when someone wants the comfort of connection but fears the responsibility that comes with it. Deep emotional bonds require vulnerability. They require openness. They require a willingness to be seen fully. For someone who avoids emotional exposure, that level of closeness can feel threatening. So instead of choosing the relationship completely, they maintain a safer position. They stay somewhere in the middle. This position allows them to receive affection without fully stepping into the responsibilities that come with commitment. They still have someone who listens, someone who understands, someone who supports them during difficult moments. But they never take the step that would turn the connection into something stable and defined. Psychologists often describe this behavior as giving small emotional signals that keep hope alive. These signals might appear as kind words, occasional moments of warmth, Unexpected messages that remind you that you still matter. These gestures can feel powerful because they appear during moments when you least expect them. Just when you begin to question whether the connection is fading, a small sign of attention appears again, and that single moment can restart the cycle of hope. You begin believing that things are finally changing, that maybe they are beginning to see your value, that maybe the future you imagined together is finally becoming possible. But time passes, and the same uncertainty returns once more. The relationship never moves forward with confidence. Instead, it continues existing in a fog of emotional ambiguity. This experience can slowly reshape the way you see yourself. When someone keeps you in this unclear position for long enough, your mind begins to search for reasons. You start wondering whether you are not enough. You begin comparing yourself with others. You analyze your behavior, your words, your personality. You search for something inside yourself that explains why the connection never fully becomes real. But the painful truth is that your worth was never the real issue. The real issue was the structure of the connection itself. A relationship cannot grow when one person stands fully present while the other keeps one foot outside the door. Stability cannot exist where commitment is constantly delayed. Love cannot flourish where clarity is always avoided. And the longer someone remains in that uncertain space, the more damage it can create internally. Because human beings naturally seek emotional security. We want to feel chosen, we want to feel valued, we want to know that the person standing beside us truly wants to build something meaningful. Without that sense of certainty, the heart slowly begins to feel restless. Peace becomes harder to find, doubt becomes louder, and eventually a deeper question begins forming inside you. Why am I holding on to something that never fully holds me back? This question can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is also the beginning of emotional awakening, because awareness changes everything. The moment you begin seeing the pattern clearly, the confusion starts losing its power. You begin recognizing the difference between genuine connection and emotional convenience. You begin understanding that real closeness does not keep you suspended in uncertainty. True care brings reassurance. It brings honesty. It brings stability. It does not hide behind mixed signals or unfinished conversations. And when you finally understand this truth, something powerful begins happening inside you. Your attention shifts away from chasing someone else's emotional distance. Your focus returns to protecting your own peace. You begin remembering something extremely important. Your presence has value. Your emotional depth has value. Your loyalty, patience, and understanding are not weaknesses. They are strengths. But those strengths deserve to exist in a place where they are recognized, respected, and returned. Because the most painful mistake a person can make is giving endless love to someone who only accepts it when it feels convenient. The moment you truly understand this, a quiet form of freedom begins to appear. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop waiting for someone to finally choose you.